I don't know about you, but I love a good organization tool, and a spreadsheet is just so easy. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Mariah and this is Woolen Words. Today I have a very exciting video where I'm going to be sharing my yarn stash and the plans that I have for it. So I know us as makers, we tend to have a huge inventory of stuff, hopes and dreams, yarn that we love but we don't know what to do with, and there is no judgment here. If you have yarn that you just like looking at and you just like having it in your house, that is amazing and I'm so happy for you. And if you are like me and you have yarn that you love and you want to use but you just aren't sure what to do with it, then this video might be for you. So I know when I first started knitting and crocheting, I would go to yarn stores and see all of this beautiful yarn and I would just buy it because I loved the way that it looked or I loved the way that it felt, but I had no plans to actually make anything with it. So it ended up just sitting in my stash, not doing anything. And then I feel a little bit guilty, which of course, please don't take this as me guilt tripping you into doing anything that you do not want to do. That is not my intention with this video. This was just a way for me to figure out how to actually use this yarn because I do want to use it and that was my intention in buying it. I just never found something that I wanted to make with it. So this year I decided, you know what, I'm going to take charge of this and I'm going to figure out exactly what to do with all of the yarn in my stash. So with the help of Ravelry, I went ahead and figured out what I had in stash, how much I had, and what I could do with it. And I wanted to share these plans with you just to give you an idea or some ideas if you decide to do this as well, and just explain how I did it in case you have no idea where to start. And I know it can be very overwhelming, especially if you have a lot of yarn that you have no idea what to do with. Trust me, I know exactly what you mean. But again, we have great tools at our hands. We have Ravelry. If you have a pen and piece of paper, that also works. I love having a scale so that I can weigh my yarn and kind of figure out exactly how many grams I have, but also maybe figure out how many yards I have. Okay, so let's get into what I did. So first I started off with a pen and paper and I just wrote down yarns that I had and yarns that I wanted to use. In no particular order, it didn't really matter. I was just trying to write down a little inventory for myself. And this gave me a pretty good idea of the quantity of yarn that I had, or the quantity of each yarn that I had, so that I was able to maybe look through Ravelry and find some patterns that maybe I wanted to use, or maybe I just had enough for this one pattern that I wanted to make. And that was really helpful, but I got to a point where that still wasn't to the extent that I wanted to be with planning for my yarn stash. So I turned to Ravelry and they have this amazing stash feature where you can put your stash in a digital space. So I went through, it took a little bit of time, but it wasn't too bad. Maybe an hour or so I spent doing this. And of course, I have a lot of yarn, but I don't have a lot of yarn, so it might take you a little bit less or a little bit longer to do this, but I think it is well worth doing, especially if you're trying to figure out exactly the quantity of yarn that you have. It does a great job of giving you yards, grams, meters, skeins. It compiles it all for you in this really great feature, and it's really great to have all of that in one spot. So the great thing that I love about this is that you go in and you put the brand and the name and the colorway and how many skeins you have or whatever, and you fill all of that information out, and then it automatically gives you the quantity that you have. So if you know you have 2 skeins of this kind of yarn, then it'll calculate for you how many yards you have, how many grams you have. And if you don't know that, if you have open skeins or partially used skeins, then you can go in and put how many grams you have and it still calculates all of it for you. It still gives you about how many yards you have or meters, whatever you use. So I think this is a really cool feature and it was a great tool to be able to help me plan the rest of my patterns for the yarn that I have. So once you go through and you figure out how much of each yarn you have, instead of having to click through each listing on your Ravelry, there's this amazing, beautiful export button at the top right of your screen on top of all of your yarn stash. And if you click that, it'll download this spreadsheet for you with all of the information that you have input into your Ravelry stash into one spreadsheet. And it is beautiful. I don't know about you, but I love a good organization tool, and a spreadsheet is just so easy. But making a spreadsheet can be really difficult and time consuming. So I definitely appreciate that it just does it automatically for you, and it is so good. Now, once I had this spreadsheet, I did make some changes to it. I kind of rearranged some things because there's information that I wasn't going to need while planning my patterns. So I kind of rearranged some things. I got rid of some columns. I moved some columns over so that I could see the information that I needed all close together instead of it being rows and rows apart. So once I had that, it was very easy for me to see the brand, the colorway, the weight, like the weight of the yarn, DK fingering, etc. And then the total yards and the total grams and the number of skeins. That's how I kind of organized mine so that I could easily see how many yards, how many grams I had, and reference that to patterns that I was looking for. Now, another thing that I did was I also added a few rows or one row below each section of yarn, and this allowed me to pair together yarns that I thought might go well together in a pattern, or these are similar types of yarn that maybe I'll use for one big project, different things like that, so that I could separate off little groups of yarn so that I could look for patterns for that group of yarn. So for example, I have a lot of Brooklyn tweed yarn that's left over from the hummingbird sweater that I made. So I wanted to keep that as a group of yarn because individually each color I might not have that much yarn left over, but if I keep them as a group, then I might be able to make a bigger pattern, maybe another sweater, maybe not a sweater, maybe like a shirt or a top or some bigger project if I keep those colors together. And I know that they go well together because I just made a sweater out of them. So that was kind of my thought process going through and organizing my yarn stash so that I could see what kind of patterns I could make with my yarn stash. Now the next step is the fun part, researching patterns. Now I know we could all spend hours and hours and hours looking at beautiful patterns and wanting to make them and hoping one day that we would come across the yarn to be able to make these. And again, I went ahead and used Ravelry as a great resource, as a tool to quickly be able to look up patterns that fit my yarn description. And if you don't know, Ravelry has these great filter options. When you go to advanced search on the Ravelry search bar, you can easily search for very specific things in patterns. And you can search for adult patterns, baby patterns, size patterns. You can search for the amount of yards that you have, garments or accessories or home decor. You can search for very specific things on Ravelry, and this is one of the things that I have come to really love about it as a platform. So the first place that I looked on Ravelry is, of course, my favorites. These are patterns that I have favorited over the years that I just love the look of. So what I did is I went to my favorites in Ravelry, and then you can advanced search your favorites. And you can also access this from the regular advanced search option in Ravelry. Once you get to the advanced search page, all of the left column is different filters that you can check and search through. So there's a little box that says in my favorites, and if you click that, it will only search things that you have favorited in the past. So then if you scroll down on that left column, you will come across different options. You can search for different yarn weights, different yard amounts. You can put a custom range of yards, which is what I ended up doing because I had some specific yardage requirements based on the yarn that I have. I couldn't exceed that, obviously, because I'm not looking to buy more yarn. I'm trying to use up the yarn that I have. So I would go for each type of yarn that I have, for each section of yarn that I had. For example, again, the Brooklyn tweed. I know that that is all fingering weight, and I just added up the yardage that I had for all of the colors that I have left over. So when I added all of those colors up, I ended up with 1,540 yards of yarn. So I went to the search and I put in a custom range of 0 to 1540, and then I searched for fingering weight yarns, single strand only, because I did not want any patterns that held yarn double or anything like that. So I searched in my favorites, and I also searched specifically for knitting patterns because I've really been enjoying knitting recently. So I wanted to look for patterns that I would want to make. And then I just had fun searching through all of the options that were in my favorites. And sometimes for some of these yarn combinations or the amounts of yarn that I had, I didn't find anything that I absolutely loved for that specific yarn or color that I had. So if I didn't find anything in my favorites, then I would just uncheck that box, and then I would be searching all of Ravelry. Every pattern that's on Ravelry, I would be searching for the same criteria of yarn, but instead of just patterns that I had favorited, it would be every pattern that's on Ravelry. So that was another great way to look for patterns if I didn't find anything that I had already favorited. And I would scroll and scroll until I found maybe a few options that I thought would be good or I might like. And then I would double check on the pattern page, specifically looking for the amount of yards that they recommend for a specific size. So I went ahead and did that for all of the yarns that I had in stash that I wanted to do something with. And now I wanted to go through each yarn that I have in my stash and the patterns that I chose to go along with them. So now that I kind of explained to you how I got here, let's have some fun and look at some yarn and figure out the patterns that I want to make. Now, Ravelry sorted my yarn into alphabetical order by brand name, so that is how I'm going to go through my stash. Starting with my Bernat Softy Cotton yarn. This yarn is in the colorway Warm Red, and it's a DK weight yarn. I have 2 skeins, which is a total of 508 yards or 240 grams. Now this yarn I had started a project with, but I ended up not really liking it, so I went ahead and just frogged it. I hadn't gotten too far, and the pattern that I ended up choosing for this one is the roll neck vest. Now this is a great pattern. It looks really versatile and cute, and kind of like it would go with anything. You could probably dress it up or dress it down, and I think this warm red color will really suit the project a lot, and I think I would get some good wear out of it, and I think it would be a good addition to my wardrobe because I don't have anything quite like this. Next we have the Brooklyn Tweed Pierre yarn that I have, and I have 6 colors of this. Now I don't have the same amount of each yarn left over, but I think this really works in my favor because I figured if I kept all of these together with the amount of yards that I ended up having, I could make a shawl or something in color work that would really turn out well since all of these colors are beautiful together. Now this yarn is a fingering weight yarn, and in total, I have 1,540 yards, so I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity for me to knit my first shawl. I found this beautiful shawl pattern. It's definitely a popular shawl pattern. I'm sure you've heard of it before, but it is the 12 Birds shawl, and this is just gorgeous. I think it would really lend itself to having all of these colors together. And it's a beautiful shawl that is very classy and elegant looking. I think it would be really special to have all of these yarns together in one piece like this. Next, I want to move on to my Chaos Fiber Co. yarn. And these are just some minis that I picked up at a festival, and I never really got around to making anything. I think originally I was looking at making some socks, but I decided against that because I thought that they would go really well together in a project. And I have this dark green, light green or lighter green, and then a gray. This is a fingering weight yarn, and altogether I have about 425 yards, so not a ton, but I was looking through patterns, and of course a lot of socks or hats came up, but I wanted to use most of the yarn instead of having some leftovers. So again, I looked to shawls, and I found this beautiful little shawl pattern called May Flowers Shawl. And I thought this was beautiful because it could work. It's a little bit of a smaller shawl. You could definitely wear it around your neck or around your shoulders still, but it is very small and lighter, maybe good for summertime or springtime. And I thought these colors would go really well with this pattern. Now we're getting into a lot of yarn that I bought at Hobby Lobby. Now these yarns, I do love them and I think they're great, especially for crochet. I crochet with a lot of these yarns, but I decided to try some knitting patterns with these because I have only ever crocheted with these yarns, and I feel like I haven't been crocheting as much, but also I haven't been working through this yarn as quickly as I wanted to. So I decided to try and give my shot at some knitting for these yarns. Now some of the colorways I still don't have patterns for, but I'll show you the ones that I do and the plans that I have discovered for them. So these three that I have are I Love This Cotton in French Lilac, Aqua, and Sunsetting. That's what it says on the label, but on Ravelry the same number code was called Water Lily. So I'm not entirely sure if they just changed the name of it or if it's something completely different. Just throwing that out there. But these on Ravelry are considered Aran weight yarns. On the label it just says for worsted weight. I've always used them as worsted weight and they come out beautiful, so I'm not sure about that. But as far as yards go, I have about 594 yards of these colors altogether. I have 2 of the sunsetting color and then about 1 each of the French Lilac and Aqua. And these I looked for good patterns that would use up most of the yarn. Again, I didn't want a lot of leftovers. I could definitely make a lot of smaller patterns maybe multiple times and get stuff out of them, but I wanted to try and use up as much of this yarn as possible. We're back to shawls. For some reason, I am on a shawl kick. I apparently need to make some of these to get it out of my system. But I landed on the Bookish shawl. Now this is a beautiful shawl pattern and it is great for stripes, solid color, whatever you have. I think that this really lends itself to a lot of different types of yarns because it does have some variation in texture, in stitch pattern, but it isn't so busy that you lose it all if you use multiple colors or maybe even a variegated yarn. I think it is just a really good overall pattern, and that's probably why it is so popular. Now this next pairing is a combination of some I Love This Cotton and some Crafter's Secret cotton. Now these are some beautiful yarns and I thought they would go really well together, and I might throw in a gold as well, but I for sure want to use cinnamon cedar, Nepalese spices, and Bordeaux, which is this great red color. Now I thought these would go really well together because cinnamon cedar and Nepalese spices are pretty much the same colors. They're just a different type of yarn. So I'm very excited to see how I can make this work. Now these are again worsted weight yarns. They are cotton, and overall with all of them I have about 736 yards. So a decent amount for sure, and I wanted to take advantage of this and make sort of a bigger pattern. So I was looking at some tops, and one that really caught my eye because it was so colorful in the original pattern sample was the Waka tee. Now this is just a really fun wrap style tee, and I love that you can wear it reversible. You can wear it both ways. I think that is a really, really good, fun option for the pattern and makes it a little bit more wearable, I think. And I've also always wanted a wrap top. I feel like I never really see them in stores. Maybe I just don't look often enough, but I've always wanted to make some wrap tees. This one just seemed like the perfect opportunity to use these really colorful yarns in a really fun way. So these next combinations of yarn I have a few options for, and I haven't settled on which colors I want to use for which pattern, but I wanted to go through them and show them to you and then show you the 2 patterns that I might make out of these colorways. So I paired up a couple of these Lily Sugar and Cream cotton yarns, and I thought these would go really well together in these pairs. I somehow almost bought like a gradient of colors in these beautiful yarns. But I thought they each paired off really nicely with each other. So for each colorway, I have 2 balls of yarn. So I have Summerfield and Sunrise Ombre, and I think these would go beautifully together in a pattern. And they are both worsted weight, of course. Each one I have about 190 yards. So it's about 380 yards total. And that is the same amount for each pair of colors. Of course, it's the same yarn, it's the same amount. None of these are open. And then I have Strawberry and Garden Party, and I thought these would be beautiful together because they have the same pinky purple pastel colors together. And then Pebble Beach Ombre and Crown Jewels Ombre I thought would go well together because they both have like blues in them, and then they have some tan in one of them and purple in the other, and I thought they would play nicely off each other. So again, for each of these pairs, I have about 380 yards. So I was looking at 2 different patterns for these combinations of yarn, and I'm not sure which colors I want to make into which pattern, but I have the Brickyard Breezes top, and this is a beautiful tank top pattern. It was a free pattern, I believe. And I thought this pattern would be perfect because you could definitely play around with color, and it has this beautiful texture, and it's just a really good staple tee pattern for the spring and summertime. And of course, this being cotton yarn, I think it's perfect for these lighter summer kind of tops. Because you can wash it. It's a little bit of a sturdier fiber as far as cotton yarn goes. This one I find really holds up well. So I'm really excited to try this. But then the other pattern that I have is more of a bralette pattern, and this is the Starlet. And I thought this would be fun, maybe to make a couple of them. Maybe I can pick which 2 color combinations I wanted to use and get a couple color variations, because this is a good thing. I would wear this underneath some other tops or with some high-waisted shorts. I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of wearability for me, especially in the summertime when it's just really, really hot. But even in spring, you could throw a light jacket over this or a cardigan, and I feel like you could really make this work for a lot of pieces. Next, I have this Malabrigo yarn, and this is a beautiful, beautiful yarn. I have 2 colorways, but I think they would just go perfectly together, and I had to have them when I saw them. These are some worsted weight yarns, and altogether I have about 840 yards, so a decent amount, but I have them in 2 colorways, and they are in Aguas and Playa. So again, I really wanted to use these colors together. I think they would just pair really nicely with each other without giving a lot of contrast, which I think would be really fun. So the pattern that I settled on for this is the Seaside Tee. And now the sample pattern on a lot of the project pages show these really nice contrasting stripes in the pattern, and I think that is beautiful and I love that, absolutely. But I think it would also be really cool to have a very subtle stripe, and I think these yarns are the perfect opportunity for me to do that. I think I will have just enough to do this pattern. And now the last one that I will talk about today is some Madeline Tosh yarn that I have, and if you watched my latest podcast, you will already know what I have decided to do with this. But I'm very excited. This yarn was a DFW Fiberfest colorway and is in Frontier Stars, and it is a sport weight. It is their pashmina base. So it is a beautiful, soft, a little bit of a sheen to it kind of yarn. And I have 1,080 yards of it. And I'm very excited to be making the sea salt tee with this. I think that this yarn would be absolutely perfect for this tee. I think the speckles make it so interesting and fun. And this is a very basic tee pattern that I have been eyeing for a very, very long time. So I'm very excited to cast this on and get started. So there you have it. This is my yarn stash and the patterns that I plan to make with it. And of course, this isn't every single yarn that I have in my yarn stash. There are some that I reserve specifically for crocheting because they make really cute amigurumi, or they're just really great for little crochet scrunchies, things like that. So I want to reserve that yarn specifically for those projects. But this yarn is very versatile and not at all something I had in mind for just crochet. So these are my plans for it. I want to thank you for joining me today and seeing all of my yarn and the plans that I have for them. I hope this video helped you, maybe inspired you to look at some patterns for yarn that you already have. Definitely dig through your stash and see what you got, because I think you'd be surprised with what you can make with what you already have. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, subscribe to this channel for more content from me, and you can find me on Instagram and Ravelry in the description below. I can definitely link all of these patterns below for you so you can find them if you're interested. And there's also an option to support me and my channel if you want to donate a cup of coffee to me or contribute to my yarn fund for future projects. Once I get through all of this stash, you can definitely find me on Ko-fi, Coffee, whatever you call it. But definitely don't feel obligated. That is just an option if you would like to support me and my channel. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye!